This is The Trend, where you'll get an enlightened perspective on trending news and topics with amazing commentary. I'm your host, RTL Faith. Welcome back to the podcast. And as always, we bring a message here that this podcast is for discussion, debate, solution, and overall compassion. Today's episode, we have an excellent guest who has a lot of very interesting feedback and insight considering where his field of his career field is located at. And I have here my guy, Gordon Firemark. He's going to introduce himself and let you know what he's about.
RTL, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here. Good to be here. Yeah, hi, I'm Gordon Firemark. They call me the podcast lawyer. And I'm an entertainment and media lawyer. I've been doing it for about 30 years now. And I just love to help creators, creative people, businesses in the creative industries to do their thing, get their message out, and do it safely so they don't end up on the wrong end of lawsuits or accusations and those kinds of things. So that's me. And I love to teach. I love to share information so people kind of know the rules and how to deal with it.
All right, respect. What I was gonna save this for later, but I am genuinely interested because a little insight for people who are listening. I was going to go to law school and I was going to go become a lawyer at one point, but I decided that I'm gonna try to make this podcasting thing work instead. And I was kind of done with school, so I didn't want to go back to school. So I was almost there. I had a lot of things in my mind, but I'm curious. How do you get into the legal field, especially considering you have the entertainment background? So I'm sure that would interest a lot of upcoming lawyers, considering how broad or how expansive entertainment and content creation is currently.
Yeah, well, all lawyers nowadays go to law school. It's a pretty much a lockstep program, 3 years of foundational education in various areas of law. And mostly they teach you really how to think and how to approach things in a lawyerly way, which is contrary to the way most people operate in the world. So
Right,
it's a
I
little new
agree.
way of thinking. But if you're interested in a field like entertainment law, I mean, let's face it, you come out of that law school environment, you're ready to go work for a law firm that does insurance work or business transactions and litigation, of course. And maybe, you can focus in different areas. But for entertainment, the interesting thing is that most of us that do entertainment law came out of the entertainment world one way or the other with a lot of exposure to film or theater or music or poetry or, arts of some sort or another. And I'm no exception. I was in the theater business. I worked behind the scenes as a sound engineer, sound technician, which also ties into the whole podcasting thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so I came from a theater background. I studied theater briefly in college and then shifted into radio, television, and film. And my major in college was radio, TV, and film. I then came out of college and worked for a couple of years working in the television production business as a producer of live sports and events kind of coverage, but always really wanted to be in the mainstream entertainment.
Right.
Mainstream's become a dirty word, but in the entertainment industry. And just as I was sort of ready to make a move to go work at in the film business, the Writers Guild went on strike, and that was my cue to go to law school. I had thought about it a few years earlier, but it didn't actually go until there was an industry-wide strike that was going to shut down all the job opportunities for a while. And
Interesting.
yeah, interesting also is that this happened right at a time when the TV series LA Law had been on the air for a few years. And so, and that show, I don't know if you ever watched it, it made being a lawyer look so sexy.
Oh
Tall
yeah.
buildings and shiny cars and fancy suits and you know lots of sex, all that kind of good stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's not what it's really like. And but it meant that there were tons of people applying to law school at that time and graduating law school at that time. So came out into a tough market for lawyers, tough job market, and ended up going out on my own. So um, entertainment law was the only thing I ever really wanted to do. If not law, I was going to, if not entertainment, it was going to be entertainment law. And so here I am 30 years later.
Okay, very interesting. I think definitely think that was something that I would have been interested in if I decided to go to law school.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big kickers, obviously, I didn't want to go to more school. I was a lot of
Yeah.
school already, just going to more school.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an announcement in regards to, oh, I saw this on some kind of news outlet in terms of the LSAT and how
Mm-hmm.
some law schools are thinking about removing it completely.
Yeah.
And I was like, if they really plan to do that, let me see. So I asked literally every law school that hit me up. I was like, are you doing the LSAT? Well, most of them are still doing it. So I don't
Yeah.
know how viable that is going to be coming forward.
Okay.
We'll
Well,
see.
for the listeners who don't know, the LSAT is the law school admissions test, and it is the standardized test. But as you know, standardized tests aren't always fair in the way they're
Exactly.
standardized. And so I think there's a big move among all kinds of higher education institutions to abandon that, or find other things to look at as well, so that they're not relying just on this one arguably biased resource as a
Right.
decision making tool, and who gets in and who doesn't. But I'll just say, RTL, it's never too late. You may decide in a few years to go back and go to law school. So nothing wrong with keeping those options open.
I
Personally,
agree.
if I had it to do again, I probably wouldn't go to law school. There's a
Fair.
statistic that says about 70% of lawyers say that if they had it to do again, they wouldn't.
That's very fair. That's very fair.
Yeah.
And maybe I will go depending on how a certain situation happens in our economy and in society. That was like, okay, I got to go to law school. But
Hmm.
entertainment law is very interesting because I feel like, based on my outside perception, that it requires a lot of networking and meeting people. What do you say about that?
I would say that's really true of any profession, any career, but especially if you're going to be in business for yourself, or as most lawyers are at some point in their career, become responsible for bringing in the business. And the only way to do that is for people to know who you are, to like you and trust you. And the only way to do that is for you to be visible and out there networking, socializing, pressing the flesh, or glad handing the potential clients or the referral sources and those kinds of things. And for me, I've chosen to be visible as a podcaster, as a video creator, and as a public speaker and teacher. So it's working,
All right, hey, that's all you want. That's all you want.
right?
A lot of very interesting things and a lot of interesting information in terms of the entertainment law field and potentially going into that. People who are listening, and his information will be in the description. So if you ever want to check out his content or hit him up, make sure you do that, of course. Uh, we're gonna move on to the next thing. I'm just gonna read off a review. People know how these are. I want to hear honest feedback. So whether it's a comment on one of my videos, comment on one of my clips, or a view from the podcast in general, I'm curious to see what y'all said. Someone said, Pod is solid. This is a solid podcast, and bro, be having some great points and topics. Keep doing your thing, playa. Let's get it. Appreciate that. Positive feedback. All right. Definitely appreciate that. We're gonna move on to our first segment. This one's called Overrated, Underrated, Just Right. OMU. Eventually, I'm gonna have a transition and all that. It's gonna sound amazing. But
Yeah.
how this works is I'm gonna spitfire 10 topics. You're gonna immediately answer overrated, underrated, just right, and then afterwards, I'm gonna ask if you want to explain any of it, and then by all means, you can go dive into your personal feedback in regards to that. All right.
Sounds great.
All right, excellent. First one is being professional slash being formal.
Just right.
Drone delivery services.
Overrated.
Historical monuments.
Overrated.
Weathermen and weatherwomen.
Underrated.
The beauty of national disasters. Like people love hurricanes and tornadoes, stuff like that.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll say underrated.
Sitcoms.
Overrated.
Astronomy.
Underrated.
Being a lawyer.
Way overrated.
Law school.
Also overrated.
College in general.
Just right.
Okay, all right. You get a lot of interesting answers right there. Do you have anyone you want to kind of dive into deeper?
Well, as far as the weathercasters one, I think that these people are scientists and they're doing their best at what is really just a step above a guessing game. But they serve a valuable, important function in our society. And if you just take a minute to think about what it would be like not to know what the weather was going to be like for the next few days, not to be able to plan or predict or decide whether you're going to go to a particular place where there's crazy weather happening. Last week, I flew to Dallas for a conference, and I happened to be flying on a day when there was a massive flooding, and the airports were shut down. And getting in the car and driving to the airport, I'm hearing what the weather reporters were saying, and at least it gave me enough information to ask some good questions once I got to the airport. So I definitely think there's value there. As far as law school and being a lawyer, I sort of already gave you my ideas on that. But college, I think I think it's a valuable time in a young person's life when you're learning a lot more than what you learn from the books and the classes. So it's the overall experience of being at college with other people your age, being an adult, and having the autonomy, but also the expectations on you for the first time in your life for a lot of people. And I think that it's a tremendous growing experience where you still have somewhat of a safety net under you, but you get to be an adult and learn how to operate in the world and to be a good person and to think. So I think that's why it's underrated.
Very true. You could definitely see it as a trial run of sorts when it comes to being on your own, being an individual in society against people you meet for the very first time. One of the things that I've taught or I've preached to people that plan to go into college, however, is to really think about if you plan to go into a specific specialty, then yeah, 100% obviously you need college.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you really just go into college just to go to college, then it could and most likely will be a big waste of time and put a lot of debt in your pocket. So that's a big thing for me. Especially, I mean, I went to college. I've done college.
Yeah.
I did well, but still, you got to realize the 4 years of your life. What are you really going to take out of it if you don't plan to utilize the sources?
Yeah. I'll agree with you on that. And I'll also add, I'd say it isn't for everybody right out of high school. I think there's a lot of maturing that can happen in that year or two after high school where you may not be ready for that college experience. Maybe you need to get a little dose of what it's like to just be a part of the workforce.
Right.
So get out and get a job and then apply to college, or go to community college for a couple of years where it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to get some of the basics out of the way, and you can mature enough so that you can make the most of that college experience when you do go to the larger level colleges and things. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't incur massive amounts of debt just because it's what your parents think you should do or because it's what society says you should do. You got to be ready for it, and you got to have some interest in what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people out there who go and have tremendously successful careers with no college because they
Oh
go and
yeah.
they work in a trade. I mean, hell, plumbers are better paid than some lawyers.
That's a fact. Plumbers, garbage men,
Yeah.
UPS drivers. Like I've been
Hmm.
seeing the TikTok clip. He says he gets paid $40 an hour. So I was like, hey, he's making bank. He's making bank. So, and that to really telling because there's a lot of things you can do that's outside of college, especially considering a lot of these programs, even though it's not a specific college institution, you
Right.
can go and study something on the internet. You can get a certification for digital marketing, SEO, a lot of
Hmm.
different things you could take accountability for yourself and learn on the internet, which is a good thing as well that people should start realizing. Because I do feel like I've talked to a lot of people, did the college thing,
Yeah.
and then I learned nothing from college and decided to learn something from the internet instead.
You got to go in with a plan. You got to go in with an objective, and it's not just to graduate.
Right,
You got to
exactly.
sort of know, you got to have your nose pointed where you want to go. And again, that's the maturity that we're talking about, is having the focus and discipline to keep it pointed there most of the time while you're there. And otherwise, yeah, you are wasting time, energy, money, and all that good
Exactly.
stuff. Yeah.
I very much agree, and he knows what he's talking about. He's been way through way more school than I have, and I actually finally finished my undergraduate, so I know I went through the experience. I did all that too, and honestly, even if you're successful, because I would say from my experience, I was very successful in college. I still realize that there's some value in college that I didn't really gain. And honestly, I could probably do a lot of the things I'm doing now without the college degree that I just obtained. So
Hmm.
it's really eye opening. But that's also telling in our current society. Are they telling people, are they telling young people, this is how you should do it? This is how
Hmm.
you should navigate after high school? That's another question.
Yeah.
Um, but we're to go into a little bit more the nitty gritty in terms of content creation, because that's something you could do without a college degree, and you can get into if you do like internet content creation. Some of the more mainstream stuff, I don't really know how that works. Do you?
You mean I didn't have to study television production for 4 years to learn how to do what we're doing right here, right now?
Yeah. Honestly, though, it's so interesting how the internet and how social media has really made the possibility of having a very lucrative and successful career
Yeah.
so easy to do, but obviously it's very massive. A lot of people do it as well. um I don't know about that when I'm talking about the mainstream aspect. I
Yeah.
know there's theater school and all that, but I don't do all of them need to do college though? Do they really need to do anything extra to really be in that space?
You know, it depends what you want to do within that space. If you want to be in the production side of it as an editor or as a producer, maybe not learning the technical skills of what you're doing, learning, and if you've got the creative aspects of it, if you're going to make creative programming. But if you're going to be on camera as a journalist, and I would say most of us who are interviewing people or who are reporting or talking about teaching about stuff, that's a kind of journalism. I think
Right.
there's something to be said for learning the ropes of journalism and the fundamentals of investigation, storytelling, how to ask good questions, the right questions, and how to shape a message to the audience. But
Very true.
a lot of that can be learned on the job also. So it goes both ways, I guess.
Nice. Very, very fair. All right, so some of the things I want to dive into in terms of like the your expertise and with the legal side and the
Yeah.
media side and how it intertwines with one another. You had some very good questions on the page, so I'm going to ask some of them and really dive into that a little bit deeper.
Okay.
One of the things that you have here is what are the most important things every content creator should do to protect themselves and get positioned for success? I'm curious on your answer is here.
Well, number one, they should be thinking about the legal and business side of what they're doing. Think about, do you need some kind of a company, a corporation to protect you from the risks and liabilities that come with a media production venture? Because let's face it, when you're making media, you look bigger than you may be, and the person who gets their nose bent out of shape or whatever, they may think you're a big a big dude and want to come and sue or something like that. So
All right.
that's one thing. You may want to just sort of shield your personal assets and stuff from that risk and liability using a corporation or a limited liability company or something like that. Second, I would say you gotta, there you can't go alone. You're going to be working with team one way or another. So as you start to think about building that team, you've got to think about what is the nature of those relationships. What are people going to own? What are they going to be entitled to? What are they bringing to the party? And you got to document that stuff. Paper the deals. Make sure that if you've got people working and you think of them as employees, they need to think of themselves as employees also and not as partners or co owners. Unfortunately, that's a big um, rough spot that new content creators get into is they're working with a
Yeah.
team, they've got a co-host or a partner or something, and next thing you know, they're having a fight over who owns this thing.
Oh yeah.
So I
Good
I talk
point.
about having a podcast prenup
Okay.
because you don't want to be naked when you get time and there's that podcast divorce. So having some written contracts with your people, your team, your partners, and so on. The third thing I would say that you have to focus on or be aware of is how the laws related to intellectual property, that's patents and trademarks and copyrights, operates. People are very used to listening to the radio, for example, where they hear a DJ talking and then he plays a song and then he comes back and talks a little more and then there's a commercial and then there's another song. Well, you can't always do that. In broadcast radio, there's a 100-year history of how this works and how to make that happen and the licensing of the music and so on. Podcasting is a newer medium, and the music industry hasn't been as easygoing about how we're going to make this work. And so,
Right,
if you want to use
exactly.
that piece of music or film clip or something, you got to get permission and know what those rules are. And the flip side of that is knowing what you own when you create the content and how are you going to protect your own interests so when somebody else comes along and wants to use your stuff, whether they ask permission and you give it, or whether they don't ask permission and you have to go after them, it's good to know those laws. And then finally, how are you going to make money? How's it going to work? Monetization. In the podcasting space, it's usually advertisement. But what's that contract look like? What's the deal with the advertiser? What are you selling? Who's your real customer? All those kinds of questions have to be considered. So that's sort of my overall framework for what to think about as a media
Yeah.
creator.
I think those are a lot of good points and a lot of things that I'm sure some people have heard of at the very least. For
Mm-hmm.
example, the first thing you talked about is establishing the podcast, the business correctly,
Yeah.
especially considering like an LLC, limited liability
Mm-hmm.
company. Do you think people should start establishing that before the creation of their platform, or do you think they should reach a certain size or certain type of established presence and then establish it as an LLC? What do you think?
Well, no lawyer would be doing an effective job of communicating things if they didn't say the words "it depends" often. So, so it depends. Look, in a perfect world, I would say, yeah, everybody before they start doing anything businessy, they should form a company, an LLC, to protect themselves, to set up the structure, to it can operate as that prenup that I was talking about as well, to figure out who owns what percentages of things, those kinds of things. Um, but we don't live in a perfect world, and it's expensive to get some of this stuff done. So
Right.
if you're not making any money, it's hard to justify spending money to get these things set up just in case we do start making money. Again, if you've got a plan, if you've got a strategy, this should be a part of that plan and strategy. And I'll tell you, I work with startups that do make it their first order of business, and it's great. But I certainly understand, especially here in California where I live and work. If you're headquartered here in California, the cost of starting an LLC or a corporation for your company, it's $1,000 or $2,000 out of pocket on day one, and then there's $1,000 in minimum taxes every single year. That if you're not generating a big profit, and let's face it, podcasting and YouTubing, you may hit it big really
Right.
quickly, but you may not. And so I'd say that can maybe wait a little bit if you're taking other precautions and being careful about things. Um, and yeah, I think that's the answer to your question.
Is there like any inherent benefit other than protection for establishing the LLC?
Well, forming these entities provides the insulation from liability that we've been talking about, that protection. It also allows you to create that business structure, the management structure. It allows you to create an
Right.
ownership structure. And also, in so doing, you can bring in investment. So it is a way to raise capital. You can have a bunch of investors that don't have control of the company,
Right.
but they get a say in a few things, like who's running the company on an ongoing basis. And so you can get investment. You can use it for um, managing the relationships. You can use it for that protection from liability. And then let's not forget, there's a little street cred just to having Inc. or LLC after your name.
True. Yeah.
Some people prefer to do business with what feels like an established enterprise. So it can be a way to do that, and maybe it's a way to just sort of distance the personal from the professional in life as well.
Very interesting point. I never actually thought about it like that. Obviously, I've worked around a lot of aspects in my current, job field in
Mm-hmm.
terms of LLC. I've seen it plenty. I understand its importance, but in terms of the crossroads of LLC, established business versus being a content creator, I don't think that's something a lot of people think about inherently. And one other aspect to it that I find interesting is, let's say the person wants to start their content creation, they want to start their podcast, and before they even think about being their own individual business and corporation, there are other companies that reach out to some content creators. I think one of them is like a MGM, or I think that's the abbreviation, or it's something else. But they're like larger companies that is reaching out to these content creators and going like, "All right, I'll help you get big, but you're gonna have to do this, this, and that for me." So, in that retrospect, what do you think about those big corporations, and how do you think these content creators should handle these situations with them?
Well, I don't know which companies you're talking about specifically, but and I know the kind of companies that you're talking about, and I'll say To content creators, anybody who's a creative person, generally they have some blinders on about the business stuff and the financials and those kinds of things. So part of the reason I say form a company, or is to at least think about these things, is it gets you into the mindset of being an owner of the business and not a worker in the business. So that's a component of this. Now, when you get that help from these kinds of companies that you're talking about, RTL, you know, go in with your eyes open, read those contracts, make sure you understand them, get some good advice about it so that you know what you're getting into, because no company out there is giving you help, support, equipment, supplies, services, whatever, without their hand being in your pocket somewhere.
Yeah.
They're going to have some ownership in something. And sometimes it's better just to be paying cash for the service than to be taking a service in exchange for some amorphous percentage of something that you may not,
Yeah.
and it's going to appreciate in value later. And I've seen it, unfortunately. You see people get squeezed out of the thing that they created, built from the ground up, and then that company is now owning it and saying, "Hey, there's the door." So that's a worst case scenario, I think, but it's definitely something you want to be concerned and consider. And yeah, just go in with your eyes open and be really careful about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I understand. Um, and I've heard or watched so many content creators who are going like, "Oh yeah, we are in with this company. They regret
Hmm.
it," and then some of their videos are not even under their name; they're under someone else's name because if they have like partial ownership. Um, but diving into the content creation aspect a little bit more, you talked about
Hmm.
copyright, which if you do YouTube, you're probably decently familiar with the word copyright. The copyright shows up constantly in terms of like YouTube, whether it's a clip,
Hmm.
music. Music is so popular in terms of copyright, or if you're doing some type of like reactionary situation where you're
Yeah.
reacting to some other media's content. Um, when it comes down to copyright, how do you think YouTubers, streamers, podcasters should really handle copyright and think about copyright when they're creating their content?
Well, I think first off is understand what it really is. I mean, you hear the term a lot, and you hear that, yeah, and everybody has this concept that you have to get permission sometimes, and that sometimes you don't. The trouble is, it's a case by case analysis that you have to do. So let me explain a little bit, if you don't mind, about what copyright is in the first place. Copyright is, first of all, you own a copyright because you author something. You create an original work of expression, not ideas, not facts, but you the way you say the ideas or express them, the way you report those facts. That's what you own. The specific words, the specific scenes, the shot by shot, sequences, those kinds of things. When you create that work and fix it in some tangible form, you own a copyright. And what that copyright means is that you own the exclusive right. That is the right to exclude others from doing certain things. And those things are making copies, distributing those copies, making derivative works, things based on or that incorporate your work, and publicly performing or displaying those works. So making, distributing, derivative works, uh, and performances and display of the work. And then you have the right to say yes or no to a request to use those things. You have the right to divide those rights up and give them to different people and get paid for using those things if there's a market, if they're valuable to other people. And so that's why there's this permission scheme needed, because the person who created that music, the person who wrote the song, owns a copyright in the composition, and they usually have a music publishing company involved that administers that for them, and they split the proceeds according to whatever formula they've agreed. Meanwhile, the record company and the artist, the recording artist, they own a copyright in the recording, and they also have an arrangement between themselves. So when
Right.
you want to use a single song in your YouTube video or in your podcast episode, unless YouTube has done the legwork for you and already made arrangements to pay for those, to use the advertising revenue to pay for the thing, you've got to go get permission from both that music publishing company that controls the composition and the record label that controls the recording, just to use one snippet of one song in your thing. So it's hard, it's complicated, it can be expensive, and it is the way it works.
Very interesting. Yeah, it definitely is very strenuous from so many content creators
Mhm.
that I know of. Like I said, especially when it comes to music, when it comes to
Yeah,
animation, stuff like that. Sometimes it's out of their control because if you do a content and company strikes your video and they stage in Japan. I remember a situation where they were
yeah,
striking this content creator and they kept on going like, "Hey, we'll sue you," and they're in Japan, and it's like it just was a
yeah.
messy situation.
And that's a
You go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say that's a really interesting wrinkle that you bring in is that when these laws are vary from country to country. What I was just describing is fundamental U.S. copyright law, which is pretty
Right.
consistent from place to place. But one thing we have here in the U.S. that most other countries don't is this principle. You've probably heard the phrase fair use. Fair use
Yes.
is a defense under the U.S. Copyright Act. It's a defense to copyright infringement for certain kinds of free speech activities using other people's material. We have a right to copy for certain purposes in certain under certain circumstances.
Right.
And that is something that's very unique to the United States because of our First Amendment, freedom of speech. Japan doesn't have that. So what's not infringing here in the States could be infringing over there. And they are free, if it's a Japanese owner, they're free to sue under Japanese law and get a judgment. And they may or may not be able to come and collect it. But if you ever go to Japan, they may come looking for you.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. You got to be aware of the type of content you're creating.
yes.
Um, and to kind of speak about YouTube a little bit more because they
Mhm.
kind of make it easier than any platform in terms of
Yeah.
copyright, appealing the process, all that stuff.
Hmm.
Twitch also, I'm not very familiar with Twitch, but it's like the highlight streaming service, and
Yeah.
people understand they're getting copyright. They can appeal those as well. Now, podcasting is a little bit more interesting considering there's not a general platform that you can see all your copyrights, all that stuff.
Hmm.
So I'm curious, for like a content creator, for example, who maybe, well, I'll use me as an example. I want to create a transition for my segment.
Yeah.
So I want to have like music and then have it say a certain thing, and I want that's my for my podcast. But some other podcast decides to use it, and I'm not aware of it. Is there like a way or to find out if people are using your content, or do you just have to go search for it?
There are technological ways to implant basically digital fingerprints in audio files and things like that. Whether or not you'll then have the means and the mechanisms at your disposal to actually chase it down, the automated systems and so on. What happens though is that if you register your work on YouTube or on YouTube is the big one, Facebook as well, I think, and they detect that piece of music that is yours in somebody else's thing, they will flag it and notify you or monetize and give you some of the money or one of those things. So their really powerful search algorithm that discovers what they call it, content ID, that discovers other people's content is a great tool. But yeah, I mean, bottom line, if they're not posting it on YouTube, you're never going to hear about it unless you're searching and looking for it. What I've found though is that people do hear about it. The word gets around. I was just talking to a client a week or so ago who discovered through the grapevine that some of his music was being used by another music producer who was claiming that he had written this stuff. And
Gotcha.
it was actually another user that he had also ripped off, had found out about it, and then sort of, went tattling. And now there's lawyers involved and lawsuits and stuff like that. So um, don't count on not getting caught because you'll be the one. you know, one in
Yeah.
50 gets caught. You don't want to be that one. So
And speaking of you know, making sure you're secure so some
mm,
random person doesn't steal your stuff. A lot of like things that are used to create a good content and like podcasts, YouTube videos,
mhm.
outside help is used quite frequently.
Oh yeah.
More specifically, freelancers.
Hmm.
So when it comes to having them help you or do the entire work for you and you pay for it, is there any means to protect yourself to make sure that guy or that woman does not sell your stuff to someone else who's asking for something similar?
Yeah, well, I mean, it counts to have a good contract. That's the most important thing. Good contract that specifies who owns this thing and what are they allowed to do with it and so on. And this is one of those areas where money talks. If you're willing to pay a freelancer to create something original for your show, that will probably cost more than for them to create something generic, you know, that they're then going to sell to five other people or 500 other people. And so that, yeah, you may need to be willing to pay a little and then have that contract that specifies who owns it, who's allowed to do what with it. And it'll also specify credit and how you acknowledge them every time you use the thing and those kinds of things. And really, that would be the best strategy. I would stay away from the lowest cost options, generally the Fivers of the world, because unfortunately,
Fair
what
enough.
you get is oftentimes knockoff kind of work. And even when you do get someone doing original work, um, they may not be, the contract you have through Fiverr probably isn't as robust as it should be in that
Mm.
in that regard.
Is there like any platform you would recommend in terms of freelance work that I'm sure
As soon as I
people.
name one, it'll come back and smack me in the face. So I'm not going to.
Fair enough. I have definitely used Fiverr, and I'm always on my P's and Q's on what
Sure.
I'm having people make. If I have met personally like some people who know what they're doing
Yeah.
and establish relationships with those people. So when in doubt, I'd go to those people. But if it's something they can't do, then
Mhm.
Fiverr might be my only option.
It's also, if it's a quick one-off for a single episode, Fiverr's probably okay. If you're looking for do a show opener or something you're going to use in every episode for the next 10 years, think about it. You're making an investment, and you
True.
don't want to have to go back and fix or change or something like that just because the guy at Fiverr wasn't the professional you hoped he was.
Right.
So, or she or they. So, think about it as an investment and maybe save up a little longer and get it done right. And if you are going to use Fiverr, and I'm not, some of those people are very talented,
Very true.
ask them to sign a contract outside of Fiverr and get it protected that way. So you can get them to do an independent contractor work made for hire agreement. They may want you to
Okay.
pay them more, but
Is there any I understand like how contract works. I've done courses in terms of the definition of contract, but
mm-hmm.
how specific does this contract need to be? Could you just like write something out, or do you need it really professionally and legally made?
Well, the lawyer in me is going to say it needs to be pretty clear and specific. Now, there are templates and things out there on the internet. I have templates out on the internet at podcastlawforms.com, for example, and Easy Legal Templates is another one. Those templates are probably a pretty good solution in these scenarios. I wouldn't, unless you know the legal jargon, I wouldn't go just trying to write it up yourself because you're bound to omit or worse, get something backwards that
Mm,
undoes what you're trying to do.
yeah.
Now, I said some specific words that matter for copyright transfer of ownership, and that is those words "work made for hire." And if the contract doesn't say that, then the contractor still owns the work. And so that's
Oh,
one
okay.
phrase you want to. That's why you see that phrase. Is it's very important to make sure that the buyer is acquiring full ownership.
Okay. All right. Well, copyright's a big thing in terms of
Oh
content
yeah.
creation. We all know. And I think another very big thing is trademarks. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
honestly don't know about establishing a trademark nearly as much as I know about copyright.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about trademarking and its purpose?
Okay, so a trademark is a distinctive word or symbol or phrase that you put it on goods or services, and it tells the world where it's coming from. Think of it, well, I mean, the term brand is trademark. And if you think about where the word brand comes from, go back a couple of 100 years to when they would sear the symbol for the ranch that the cow came from, so that when it was taken to market, they knew who they're buying this cow from. The red triangle on a box of cookies or crackers tells you it's coming from Nabisco. The red and white logo on a can of soda tells you which company made this soda, right? The
Mm.
same can be true of your trademark for your podcast. The title of your show could be a trademark if you do it right, if it's distinctive and it's used in commerce. So The Trend with RTL Faith is, that's a great distinctive title. And as long as, I mean, we may have issues with somebody else wanting to use the word The Trend or something like that,
Right.
but it's a good start. Xerox, Velcro, there's all kind of Escalator, these all kinds of brands that immediately tell you what you're getting from whom, as long as it's not purely descriptive. My own podcast title is a great example of what not to do. Now, I've been doing it long enough that it has become distinctive. It's acquired the secondary meaning in the mind of the public. But entertainment law update, it's a very descriptive. It tells you exactly what you're going to find inside this
Right.
podcast. So that would not be registrable as a trademark until I had been using it for 5 years or more, where
Okay.
audiences now know, oh, that's my show. That's Gordon's show. So choose a distinctive title when you can.
Mm. So that's very interesting. Because I went back and forth when it comes to the name of my podcast and name the other platforms, of course, and other things that I've created are pretty generic. They're descriptive of what it
Mm-hmm.
is, but it's not
Yeah.
super unique, right? So in the situation for obviously my name, my content creation name is very unique, but it does say The Trend. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of podcasts. I also have Trend in the title.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it possible to have a title and then people trademark words in your title, trying to kind of take your podcast name away?
Well, it comes into that distinctiveness thing, and generally, as a government, well, as a rule, the government won't let you take a word completely out of the lexicon. And there are a few examples where I'm thinking of Entrepreneur for magazines and other media project. Nobody else gets to call their show Entrepreneur or The Entrepreneur Show or something like that. But
Right.
there are situations where they do use the word entrepreneur in the title, as long as it's not the core main thing. So that's actually a great example. There's a very successful podcaster who had a show called Entrepreneur on Fire, and the magazine folks came and made him change it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So now the show is called EO Fire. Everybody still knows what he's talking about. It's a show where he interviews entrepreneurs. So there are ways around it, but better to avoid that as possible. Now, I do want to just say one other thing about trademarks. It is okay to talk about brands on your show, like I did holding up the can of soda, like I mentioned these other brands. That's not infringing on their brands, because I'm not suggesting that what we're doing is sponsored by or endorsed by or coming from those companies. So it's okay for you to have a show that talks about Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Xerox or Velcro or those kinds of things. You just can't use the name in your title of your show as a brand yourself.
Mm, very interesting. When it comes down to it, big question.
Mm-hmm.
When you want to establish a trademark, maybe you found something very, very interesting and very unique to you in the content that you're trying to make. What would be the general process for a person to do it in America, for example?
Do a search. Make sure you're not already stepping on somebody else's toes by using it in a way that is confusingly similar to somebody else who's already in the marketplace for the same kinds of goods and services as you. If you've got a title for your podcast and there's already a medical device company that uses that name, probably not a problem. But if there's another company out there that's putting out books under that title, or records, or something else that's sort of related to the media and entertainment field, that's going to be a problem. So don't use a name that's confusingly similar to something else.
Right.
If so, then once you've done that search and sort of confirmed that there's no problem, and you can hire a lawyer to do a very comprehensive search if you want to, but start with Google, start with Amazon, start with the trademark office websites, and do some digging on your own, because that'll help you knock out the ones that are obviously similar. Once you've chosen a name, adopt it and start using it in commerce, because trademark rights are acquired from use. And commerce means transfers between offers of transactions across state lines. So
Right.
anything on the internet nowadays is pretty well
So you can't buy
interstate
a
commerce.
trademark?
Yeah, yeah, you could buy it if another company has already established a brand and they want to sell it to you. Yeah, you could certainly buy it, but assuming you're coming up with something new and distinctive, then just adopt
Okay.
it and start using it. Once you've got it in use in commerce for a while, for a bit, in the case of podcasts, I say, once you have the second or third episode done, we can go ahead and register the trademark establish the brand that way, and that gives us the broader level of protection and at least geographically in the United States or wherever else, what other countries you've registered in, you can
Okay.
stop others from using confusingly similar names.
Very interesting. I'm sure a lot of people who are creating a YouTube channel or
Yeah.
are very established content creator already would find this information interesting. So people,
Yep.
if someone tries to take your YouTube name and try to do something with it, you like, all right, let me handle this real quick. So it
Right.
does sound very useful information. Uh, all right, so I want to go to our next segment.
Great.
This one is called Deeper and Deeper. Deep and Deeper. It used to be called something else, but I decided to change it. And this one, I'm gonna give you two questions. One, a little bit more of a societal question in terms of, one of those questions that society may find interesting, and another one's a
Yep.
little bit more personal. Yeah, so your own perspective on the question. So choose which one you want to answer. So these are the
Okay.
questions. Do you believe the current legal system in America is more corrupt than not? Second question, a portal to very different questions as you're going to find out. A portal to another world opens in front of you. You don't know how long it will stay open or if you'll be able to get back after you go through. What do you do? So you could choose which one you want to answer.
I'm going to go for both because my answer to the second one is super quick. If
Okay.
I don't know anything about what's on the other side of the portal, I'm not going to go do it. That's just me. I'm
Okay.
not ready to take. I could land there and there's no oxygen,
True.
so I'm not going to take a chance like that. If I knew something about it, I might think differently. On the other question, more corrupt than not, I would not go that far. The legal system is just like everything else in the world, built and made up by people. And some people are less honest than others. Some people are corrupt. Some people are scrupulously honest. I think and I believe that the vast majority of people who have chosen to practice law as a profession are honest, respectable people of integrity and ethics.
All right.
And it's the few, the one bad apple spoils the bunch. We're all painted and tarred with that sort of disgusting thing that rubs off when you happen to share a profession with people who don't play by the rules. One
Right.
of the things about lawyers is that we are better at identifying what the rules are and sometimes at pushing the boundaries of where the edges of those rules land. And it's the ones who go too far that we hear about because it's sensational or obnoxious or annoying or whatever it is. So
Right.
more corrupt than not? No. Yes, there's a fair bit of corruption in the legal profession. I don't want to use the word corruption. There's a fair bit of sketchy ethics in the legal profession, and I think that's true in most fields nowadays. There's always going to be someone who doesn't follow the rules.
Right.
But with lawyers in particular, we tend to be dealing with high-profile stuff, issues that matter to the society as a whole. At least a lot of times we're in crossing over into politics or media and those kinds of things, and so you hear about it, you see it, and I think that part of that is that the media's job is to shine a light on that stuff, to keep us aware of what's going on. And they've chosen to do it in sensational and obnoxious ways sometimes, but that's the role of the media is referred to as the fourth estate. The role of the media is to keep the other branches of government accountable, and they're
Very
doing a
interesting.
reasonably decent job of it, even if it's distasteful from time to time.
Very fair, and I do agree. I've spread it very consistently because I talk about a lot of things, a lot of controversial
Yeah.
topics as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do think that there's some weird obsession with focusing on negativity and really kind of spreading that negativity and getting an overarching opinion on an establishment based on one or a few negative opinions and negative people. I think that is something that is very problematic, and how news is and how social media is, it spreads like wildfire. So I think I very much agree into the aspect that yeah, it's not as bad as you think it is. You hear it all the time from some random person who knows nothing about lawyers. Oh, you're a lawyer? You might be sketchy. You might be manipulative. Like they have negative opinions automatically.
It's like saying all baseball players cheat. All lawyers are scumbags. No, it's just not a fair statement. The fact of it is, the ones that make it, that get the attention. Let's face it. If the news reported, "Hey, Gordon Firemark did everything right today," nobody would care.
Yeah.
So they report the stuff that's sensational. So and so was accused of such and such and stealing from his client's children and having sex with animals, or those. I'm getting crazy here, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I
That
understand.
sensational stuff is what makes headlines. It's what sells newspapers. It's what gets viewers to tune in and watch the news, and bloggers, and it gets the attention and the engagement that is the currency of modern media.
All right. And I think you have a, seems like from outside looking in, you have a very fair perspective on what is going on in society, which I do appreciate, which is why I'm curious about your feedback on one of the things that has been going on. I didn't bring it up
Mhm.
earlier, but this is one of the trending topics that if you guys haven't been listening or paying attention to YouTube, this is what's going on. So there's a content creator who is fairly really big. He has over 20 million subscribers. His name is Corey Kenshin. He dropped a video maybe last week or a couple days ago, uh, coming at YouTube. And the situation was following the favoritism and potential racism that he believes YouTube is exhibiting.
Mm.
And one of his primary examples is they dropped a video. Oh, he dropped a video that literally every content creator was doing about a video game. He had the similar content to everybody else, but his one of his videos got a guideline, a strike, so it got age restricted. So obviously, if
Mhm.
you know YouTube, that's very bad. It dwindles the performance and
Yeah.
affects your money. So he kind of cross-checked that from other content creators, and other creators who had the same exact moment, they didn't get that to happen to him. And he was wondering why this happened to him specifically and what is going on YouTube, and a lot of back and forth between him and YouTube. And he actually used one of the other content creators who was not black to say, "Yo, what's going on?" And they was like, "Okay, fine, it's okay." And they took away his strike. He was very pissed about this, and came about YouTube's like, "Why did you do this? That's what's going on." And then they struck both the channels. So a
Mm.
lot of weirdness in terms of YouTube from his perspective. And then another content creator was coming at Twitch. And
Mhm.
this time he was permanently banned from a situation because his viewers, he was talking about one of the idols of Twitch named Pokimane, and his viewers were hate mobbing her for some of the opinions. He was saying he wasn't outwardly going like, "Oh, be hateful," but they were being hateful when they arrived in her chat. He got permanently banned for it. He remorsed it. He reconciled with the content creator. Now, he's permanently banned. He's very upset. He brought an example. Someone who was confirmed having sex on Twitch was only banned for 7 days.
Yeah.
If she was a female, obviously she wasn't black. And he was calling out Twitch for that, for favoritism, prejudice. Why did she get a 7 day ban and I'm permanently banned, even though I reconciled with the content creator? So, in both situations, these content creators feel like they've been unfairly uh, judged and uh, punished based on what
Yeah.
was going on. So, from your perspective, being an entertainment lawyer, and let's say you're one of their lawyers, how would you handle, or what would your feedback be about the situation?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure how I'd handle it as a lawyer. I'd be looking for what have they done that is contrary to their own terms of use, their own terms of service, maybe contrary to law, like discrimination or something like that. Excuse me. and and those kinds of things. But what I'll say is that you know there's no such thing as all things being equal. The bigger a content creator gets, the higher profile they are on the platform. The guy with 20 million views has got a bigger target painted on him than the guy with 500,000 views. It's just the nature of it. It's the way it goes. When you're that big, you attract different kind of attention and a different degree of scrutiny. And so, yeah, it may have been that they didn't spot it when these other creators did the same exact thing until he called it to their attention. I don't know. I'm giving YouTube a big benefit of the doubt.
Little context.
Yeah.
So the 20 million subscriber, very
Mhm.
big creator, he compared himself to another guy who also had 30 million subscribers,
Okay.
and the other guy was kind of a figurehead of YouTube, very popular. They're very much like him, and he's
Mm,
saying
yeah.
they're favoriting him versus me
Okay.
based on a discriminatory,
Yeah.
uh,
It,
personal
and
feedback.
it's entirely possible that that is the case, and it may be that they're making more money from the other guy, and so it's an easier or harder decision for them to take the cash cow out of the equation. Again, those two sound like they're similar size, similar magnitude
Yeah,
of things, and so, but I think that, and I don't know how to say this in a polite way that's not going to get somebody angry, but a lot of people of color make that they jump to the conclusion that their mistreatment, they're being treated unfairly, is on that basis when it may or may not be.
right,
And I'm certainly willing to acknowledge and accept that there's a lot of racism out there. There's a lot of genderism. There's a lot of bias of all kinds out there, but it isn't always the reason things don't go your way.
right,
And so I think we have to be really careful not to jump to those conclusions, and at the same time, not to immediately write it off as, oh, it must be something else. And in this particular case, YouTube will probably have to explain itself in one way or another.
yeah,
But ultimately, it's their party. They get to decide who gets to stay and who doesn't. And as long as they follow their own internal guidelines and their own rules that they tell you about, they can throw you out. And same with Twitch and deplatforming people. And it isn't fun, it isn't cool, but anytime you're building your business on somebody else's platform, on somebody else, you're building your house on their land. They
right,
want to do something else with that land, you're going to be out of luck. And it's a risk that creators have to take. And um, YouTube, that's one of the things I was saying about podcasting, where there is no single platform that is the de facto place for podcasts. Spotify is certainly trying to be.
oh, they tried it with Joe Rogan. Yeah, they tried him.
Yeah. And they're succeeding in a large way. If you're not on Spotify, to a certain audience, you just don't exist as a podcaster. But the fact of it is, and this is one of the most powerful, great things about podcasting as a medium, is that this open standard, the RSS standard of file structure that allows for the distribution, the syndication of content, means that anybody can create a podcast and get their message out, and at relatively low risk of being deplatformed. Even if they get removed off one platform, there's another one that will take them,
Right,
or they can build their own. So that's why I love podcasting. Actually, is it's open, and it's what's the word I'm looking for? I won't say it's equal, because there are a lot of inequalities there too,
right.
but it's definitely accessible and a more level playing field than any other I can think of.
I would agree. And I think I think a lot of people have said this, but it definitely seems like it's growing
Hmm.
as a platform. Recently I saw Twitch say that they are going to start introducing podcasts. Not
Hmm.
Twitch, Twitter is going to start introducing podcasts on their
Yeah,
platform, and YouTube may or may not make like an official page for the podcast as well.
they did last week. Yeah,
They did? Oh,
yeah, they
okay.
launched it last Monday.
Oh, well, I need to be on top of that for sure. So,
No, it made a big splash, and there was nothing much behind it yet, but there will be. It's going to be pretty impressive.
all right, all right. So
Yeah.
people are realizing the necessity of podcasts because it allows you the platform to relay your message and have genuine
Yeah.
conversations where you're still making content, but it's not like a video or you're trying to entertain people on a Twitch stream. It's still a little different in what it's trying to provide. So I think that's very interesting. And I also agree, and sometimes people use the racist card a little bit too soon. I always like to look at the facts and what is actually going on before I make
Yeah.
my own personal opinion about the situation. Based off
Mhm.
of the evidence that I've seen from those situations, racism needs a little bit more evidence, but favoritism definitely seems like it did exist in those situations,
Sure.
considering um, especially the girl having sex on Twitch and only 7-day ban. Like usually, if someone says a word that Twitch doesn't like, they'll get like a month ban. So it's
Oh, really?
yeah, it's the policies are a little bit loose to
Yeah.
certain
Well,
people and not to others, and that bias may exist. If someone were to decide, hey, I'm gonna come after you, YouTube, I'm gonna come after you, Twitch, would you, one, recommend it, and two, if they did do it, how do you think they should approach it?
well, yeah, boy. I think, look, if they've done something really wrong and it's caused you harm that is, lawyers, we talk about measurable in dollars,
Right.
basically. Or if there's a reason to, ask a judge to issue restraining orders and injunctions and things like that. I really hope that there are people who have the courage and the financial ability to pursue their claims. That financial ability is a key factor because lawyers don't work for free mostly. And if there isn't money to be had from as a result of winning that lawsuit, you're going to have a very hard time finding lawyers willing to do it on a contingency kind of a basis. But some principles are worth standing up for, and I think it does make sense to go after uh, the wrongdoers when they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Um, taking on a YouTube or a Facebook or a Twitch, these are giant companies, big
Yeah.
companies with lots of money to throw at problems, and they'll throw them at the lawyers before they throw the money at you. So don't think you can just make a claim and they'll write you a check to get you to go away. You're going to spend a year or two of your life with headaches and digging in your old files to to produce documents and give depositions and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So it is not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
You definitely need like some crazy evidence to really
Yeah.
try to make them
I
at the
mean, and
very
there may
least.
be the slam dunk where there's somebody in an email saying take this N word down or something like that. That's going to do a pretty good job of convincing a jury. Oh yeah, this is racially motivated.
Mm,
Yeah,
all
but
right.
you never know.
You never know. All right, so let's move on to one of our last segments. Last segment here. I call it contra segment. Basically, it's a this or that situation. I'm gonna propose two things, and you just answer based on what you prefer in the this or that scenario.
Okay.
All right. Would you, in a criminal trial, would you rather be the prosecutor or the defense attorney?
Defense attorney.
Why? Because I've heard a lot of challenges of being about being a defense attorney in a criminal trial.
I think that defense attorney's job is to protect society, not well. I mean, and so is the prosecutors, but on any individual defendant's case, the job of the defense attorney is to make sure that the prosecutors and the police and everybody else has done everything right. If they have done everything right and they're able to convince that jury that this person is guilty, the defense attorney has still done his job if he's held them accountable for following the rules. The rules can't just apply to the defendants. They have to apply to the government, the prosecutors, the police, and so on. And the defense attorneys are doing the thankless, underappreciated job of holding those folks accountable to those rules. So it's a close call because I do believe in the rule of law and law and order, but I also believe that that has to apply across the board. And the way that defense attorneys when they do their job well, they are about making sure they follow the rules. And sometimes your client is in fact guilty,
Right.
and they still are entitled to get a fair trial. If the cops still cornered them and coerced a confession or did something they shouldn't, well, then he shouldn't go to jail, even though he did the crime. And that's part of the defense attorney's role. I thank my lucky stars that I don't have to wrestle with this on a daily basis.
Fair enough. All right, next one. Would you rather be a full time podcaster or a full time lawyer?
Podcaster, hands down.
Fair.
Making content is so much more fun than making legal stuff.
I can imagine. I can definitely imagine. I had to. I was like, dude, is this really what I want to do? Do a bunch of paperwork all day? You know?
I mean, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to work with people who are making content, and I do make a lot of content myself. And I've made a business and a life for myself that I get to do a lot of fun stuff, and I get to use my brain and help other people. So I don't dislike what I do at all. I love it, But if I had to choose between the two, podcaster.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, next one. If you had to truly know one concept as a content creator, is it more important to know about copyright or trademark?
Copyright. Yeah, so much easier to cross the line inadvertently if you don't know what you're doing.
All right, fair enough. Next one. Which means of entertainment will be the most influential in 10 years? Hollywood mainstream or internet content creators?
Oh, internet content creators, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I watch the way my children use media, and they don't sit down and watch a movie on television. They don't sit down and watch the channels that the adults watch. They're on YouTube, they're on Twitch, they're on TikTok and Twitter and whatever's next. And the people who are really good at sharing a message and getting word out using those tools, they are going to be the stars of the next decade.
Mm. Do you think that will be eventually making mainstream Hollywood inferior, potentially obsolete to internet content creators?
No, I think that the mainstream, what we call mainstream, and as I said, that's become a dirty word lately, but
Right.
I would say that the big entertainment and industry machine will always have its place because it provides something that um, that TikTok and Twitch and YouTube and all these things, they can't really produce quite the same way, and that is the giant, big budget, the experience of sitting in a movie theater, the escape that we get when we really immerse in one thing for 2 hours or longer and that kind of stuff. So
Right.
long form entertainment content, it may be delivered to us in different ways, but the need for it will not completely go away. It will um, the industry will be more selective about what it makes, and I imagine that it will shrink as an industry in some ways. But streaming media, Netflix, and those kinds of things are also coming in and having that disruptive effect.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how the short form stuff that we're talking about influences the long form, and how we change the way we maybe tell stories, and how we maybe use both, you know, combining things. And who knows? Maybe there will be TikTok series where you watch an hour long movie 1 minute at a time. I don't know.
I will say that a lot of YouTubers, potentially TikTokers, are trying to really step into that next realm. Some of
Yeah.
them trying to make movies. Some of
Hmm.
them, I saw one YouTube channel. He made a whole like 10-ish minute anime based off Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, a lot of people loved it. It went viral. Obviously, you could tell a Dragon Ball Z episode from a YouTube video, but people are
Hmm.
definitely trying to enter into that realm. And if people are starting to be able to do it successfully, who really knows what's going to happen for like mainstream? And if anybody wants to be an actor, everybody's like, all right, I just want to be a YouTuber. Why would I want to be an actor? So
It's different kind of storytelling, and storytelling's been around since the very beginning of cave drawings and sitting around the campfire and sharing stories. So it's just another evolution of the medium.
mhm. But one another step I want to take with this actually is I do think for the most part internet content creators are taking over. They're taking over the youth. The even the platform itself and how it's designed is more accessible and easier to understand for younger individuals. However, well, I would say for like Hollywood mainstream, Hollywood actors, even sports athletes, for example, they're mainstream, but they have a certain level of responsibility that they understand in terms of their influence. Whereas I don't think content creators want that same type of responsibility, but their influence is becoming greater than any or than current athletes, current actors, current musicians. So, do you think at a certain point these content creators will need to understand their influence? And I would say, will there be a moment where they're going to have to be more like actors and athletes and musicians in terms of their daily navigating of life, their PR, all that stuff?
I think it's the Spider-Man series that came up with the line, with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right, Uncle Ben. Yeah.
And I think that is really true, especially with media and media creation. We hold in our hands these very powerful tools, and we can use them in ways that are foolish and silly and goofy and don't give us a lot of influence and don't create a lot of impact. But when we set out to create impact, we need to be conscious that we're doing that, and we need to be thoughtful about what impact we're going to have with the media that we make. And sometimes it's just to entertain, but if you've got something to say, these tools are great for saying it, and we need to be responsible and thoughtful. And in journalism, there used to be this notion of something called the fairness doctrine. There used to in media, um, and that has gone away. But I think we ought to still think about presenting multiple sides of a story, multiple points of view, and not just the one-sided shouting our point of view, and so on. There's plenty of that out there already. I think the ones who are going to really succeed and stand out are the ones that are thoughtful, presenting multiple points of view. The adults in the room, even if you're
Right.
kids, you can be the adult in the room by just being more conscious about these things.
I very much agree, and it should definitely be considered in our current landscape, considering that politics is really becoming more and more part of internet content creation to the point where you could say there's a whole genre of content creators who talks about politics and spread their opinion. There's a battle of red pill versus blue pill. There's the males versus the females. There's a lot of strife in terms of different sides and people expressing their opinion, which is one of the reasons why I started this podcast in the first place, is to really have those conversations without trying to mob the other person, tear them down with pitchforks and fires. So that responsibility should be given to these content creators because that's what could happen. The excessive amount of negativity, toxicity, and hatred will spread, and well, it's the internet. Especially if you make a platform on here, you won't be able to escape it by any means.
Yeah, there's so much divisiveness. There's so much us and them, separate, the other, all that kind of things. And I think we're spending so much time and energy and of our political, social, and even financial capital focusing on what separates us, what makes us
Right.
different. And there's something to be said for that diversity of views and so on. But we do also need to spend some of that energy and capital and all those things on remembering what makes us more alike than different, what makes us
Very true.
more, we're all part of the same human race. We're all in this boat together. We're on this thing floating around in space that, I'll say it, we may not have this planet for us as much longer if we're not starting to pay attention.
Very
And we
true.
have to listen to each other in order to figure out what's next. So let's focus on what makes us similar and a family of man.
I very much agree. Very much agree. The two more we're gonna wrap, and then we're gonna wrap it up. Who do you appreciate working with more, content creators or actors? Mainstream, I guess, Hollywood.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have worked with some huge names in the acting world, some huge names in the content creation space, and some smaller creators on both in film, television, all those things. I will dispute the notion that actors aren't content creators, and let's just, they
Internet
are.
content creators, to be
But
fair.
yeah, I get your meaning. Um, I boy, it's like asking which is your favorite child. you know, I'm not sure I want to answer. I'll say that the content creators have me excited right now because of the potential of this industry, of this medium, and because of the power and how they're using it. I was at the podcast movement conference just last week, and some people are making amazing stuff, and they're doing amazing things and having a tremendous impact. And I don't know that the typical actor in Hollywood, not to say the big stars, they make an impact, and there are those actors who really are driving forces behind the movies that they choose to work on. Maybe they write them and produce them as well. Those folks are having big impact too. But I think it's much more common in the podcasting space where we've got these grassroots efforts to do a show about. I mean, there's a woman I met last week who does a show about you know, dying, about we're all dying slowly, and talking to people who are near death, who are on, the end of that journey, and people who have had near death experiences, and people who have survived their loved ones dying. I mean, that's not something you're going to see on mainstream TV. But this woman interviews people and talks about it every single day. And maybe it's a comfort to some people. Maybe it's a shock into awareness for some people. Uh, I think that's just tremendously powerful, and that excites me. So if I have to choose, I'll go with the internet digital content creators right now.
Very fair. That is very interesting. Also, very interesting podcast idea. I could see there are a lot of unique perspectives that can come
Mhm.
from a conversation like that. I'm
Sure.
sure. And I'm curious how many times people bring up ghosts and
Yeah.
the supernatural. So, uh, I still don't know if it's real or not, but who knows? Who knows? All right, last question. I asked this for everybody. Would you rather condemn someone you hate or forgive someone you hate?
Forgiveness all the way. Doesn't mean I forget, doesn't mean I necessarily trust them ever again. But forgiveness means that I'm letting go of my part of holding a grudge, of feeling upset, of being hurt and injured and damaged. And you cannot move on with your life if you're holding on to the things, the anchors of your past. The notion of a millstone around your neck. If you're not forgiving, you've got that millstone. You got to put it down and move on.
All right. Very good message. You already know what I'm like here. I am a big advocate of forgiveness. Um, you never know how you'll act in a lot of different situations, but at the very least, understanding that some of these things that people are hateful about, toxic about, negative about, they're not that serious at the end of the day. It's not that serious.
Yeah.
Easier to forgive them. And like you said earlier, you will soon realize that you have more in common than you don't with said individual. So many things out there to really be appreciative and enjoy together. Sport, Marvel, DC, anime. There's so many things out there. So uh, I think that is the final question in regards to that. Do you have any final words? Anything you want to plug before we wrap it up?
Well, RTL, I'll say first of all, thank you for a great interview. You ask interesting questions, different from the kind I'm used to getting a lot of times. Not that any are better or worse, but it's been a really interesting conversation. So thank you for that, and for stimulating me to think and challenging me a little bit. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. You can find out more about me by going to gordonfiremark.com. I hold myself out as the podcast lawyer. If you are doing any kind of digital media, I think there's something there for you. I have courses, I have legal templates, I have an ebook about digital media creation, and all of it you can find it at gordonfiremark.com or uh, um, thepodcastlawyer.com. And my podcast is called Entertainment Law Update, if anybody's a glutton for punishment and wants to listen to me talk about legal cases. So
All right. Well,
thanks for
appreciate
the
having
opportunity.
you on. And like you said, go check out his stuff. Very interesting stuff. Hey, law can be very interesting. I actually very much enjoy law, the legal stuff, the facts and versus the
Hmm.
fiction. Um, you've heard me talk about so many cases here on the podcast, so make sure to check him out. This was a very, very good discussion. Learned a lot, actually. Learned a lot in terms of the information you provided. And it's great to always hear a different perspective on a lot of the things we talk about here. So appreciate having you on. Y'all have a good one. Take care.